But then I also removed the lowering kit, so it's got stock ride height right now. Now I've got the preload on the lowest setting, and it felt pretty good. So I'm going to run it for a little bit and just kind of get a feel for it. But what I did, this silver thing right here has been replaced, and also now it's got a quote-unquote new used shock in there. So the old shock was blown, so I couldn't get the adjustment right, and the bike was lowered before, so now it's sitting up where it's supposed to.
Hello and welcome to, well, Carlin's Worlds. Yeah, that should work. I'm a wanderer, a tinkerer, sometimes a nomad, a military veteran. I do things differently. There will be tinkering. I have a motorcycle, a truck, and a school bus. I live off-grid, so there will be some solar, batteries, inverters, and maybe even some wind. It blows. And that's all I can fit into about 30 seconds. Oh, and please, if you like any of this, it would be really awesome if you could subscribe and click that notify bell. Drop a comment if you have any questions or ideas. Share, like, comment, subscribe, notify. Oh, and Patreon if you're really an awesome kind of person. Cool. On with the show already.
Okay, chapter 13 in the climber manual for the KLR. This is a 2007 model. Okay. Looks like that. It's not the new style. Okay, this is the shock out of the bike. This is the new one that we're going to put in, or I should say the used one, but we're putting it in. This is the right-hand side because that's the damper adjustment, and on the left-hand side is the preload adjustment. Okay. This has the, I'm going to call it a bell crank and the links. I've also got a whole nother set of bell crank and links that I bought separately, not knowing this was going to come with it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to read through, I mean, literally it's this much is, I mean, like the page before removal and installation. Read all procedures before removing shock absorber. If the motorcycle has been modified, some disassembly procedures may not be necessary. That's all you missed. So now you got everything. Okay, so I'm going to cover it in the book real quick. I'll show you on the bike, and then I'll put the camera on the tripod and we'll actually go through it. So remove the rear wheel. We've done that. Remove the brake hose guide from the swing arm. I'll show you that in a second and why I'm not going to do it. Remove the lever arms from the swing arm. Figure 3, when bolt is removed, the swing arm pivots freely. Use wire to secure the swing arm in the up position. We are going to disconnect the links from the swing arm, and this is looking at it from the bottom. Okay. Remove the nut from the lower shock absorber mounting bolt, but do not remove the bolt at this time. Figure 4. So then we're going to remove this. Alright, here's the links hanging down now. Remove the left side cover, chapter 15. Remove the upper mounting bolt, figure 6, which is the top of the shock, because that hose was right in the way. And then remove the lower mounting bolt, and then remove the shock from the bike. Inspect the unit as described in this chapter. Refer to Table 2 for recommended shock absorber settings, and reverse this procedure to install the shock. Note the following: lubricate the bores and mounting bolts with waterproof grease. That's all there is to it. That's the whole thing. It's really only top bolt, bottom bolt, and the link that goes to the swing arm. We got the wheel off. Okay, brake hose guide. I'm going to run back and forth a couple times on this. This is the brake hose guide. This bike has been bottoming a lot because the shock is blown. This screw has been hitting the bottom of the muffler enough that there's a little bit of a nick here. This plastic is smashed and I can't get a screwdriver in there. If I really had to, I'd get that off, but because part of the procedures is I'm going to support this with a wire anyway, it's not going to go very far. So I'm just going to leave this on here. I'll just kind of keep an eye on it to make sure I don't drop it too far. The lever arms from the swing arm, and then the nut, and then the side cover. Okay, from down low, we are going to be disconnecting here. And you can see the 3 different holes for this lowering kit. And the idea was you could choose one of 3 holes to get a different length. Alright. So we're going to remove that and put a regular one back on. But we're going to disconnect here. And then the bottom of the shock is here. I might end up just changing the link and the shock and leaving this piece in there. And then from this side, we're taking this side panel off. And that'll give us access to the bolt that is right behind the breather hose. And let's see if this is in the way or not. I think I can move that. Some rummaging later. Ah, that's kind of scary. Hey, look at that. 22 on that side. Alright, now we're getting somewhere. Alright, stop the camera for a second, I'll be right back. I use the breaker bar for when I'm changing flat tires. And so I've got the breaker bar, a short extension, and what is this? 22 millimeter. And I took my paint marker and I labeled it truck wheel lug so I can grab it, so I don't have to look for it. What we figured out is it's 22 millimeter on the nut side, and the bolt side is 17. Okay. In some ways it's a pain in the butt if you have a different size, but it works out for your advantage as much as anything, because you probably don't have 2 22 millimeter sockets. Okay, now it's this. It wasn't that it was that tight, it was just a matter of getting a tool where you could get it done. Get the tool out of the way. Now I take the nut off. It's got a washer. So, start making a plan here. So we're going to have several of these things apart at the same time. We've got the bolt loose that holds the swing arm to the shock. Alright, so I'm going to push it out with the screwdriver from this side and kind of look for stuff falling. First link is down. It should be the bolt in the dirt. Perfect. Take a look at the bolt. Not too much wear. That's why it was hard to get the socket to stay on. It's a very low profile head, which would keep it from hitting the other stuff. Otherwise looks to be in good condition, not broken. Okay, now push the screwdriver back through the hole. Get the link out of the way. There's definitely some slop in here. I think these, most likely these links are not made out of very good material. Something to think about. OEM may not be the best thing in the world, but it's probably well engineered. Companies don't like to get sued just because they put cheap parts on and your suspension breaks, it leaves you out in the middle of nowhere. So, if you're going to replace an OEM part with a modified part, I guess it's up to you to hope it's as good as the original one was. Alright. So that's done. Oh. And yeah, we were hanging by the hose. That's nice job. Let's fix our hook here. There we go. You can see the link hanging down, and at the top of the link is the one, oh actually no, not the top of the link, but the one next to it. Now, I'm going to get the shock off first, and then I'm going to look at those bolts for the link to see if I want to replace the whole bell crank or just the links. With any luck, these will be the same size, that'll make it easier on us. Okay, same thing. Okay, I'm going to put these nuts, hardware back together. This is the one for the link. Not good enough. Let's do this. Let's put this back through the link so we keep it all together. I've found if you kick something out here in the sand, you may never find it. If you do, you spend a lot of time looking for it. That's not good use of your day off. After finding the 18mm, I clean all the dirt off of the bolt head. It is in fact a 17, which I have. Yeah, anyway. This tension is too long. Let's try it there. Paying attention sometimes is good, I don't know. In this case, all of the nuts are on this side. Just kind of think about that when you're taking things apart. They might have had a reason. Maybe there's a clearance issue, or if you put the nut on the wrong side, it'll hit. Okay, the instructions said take the nut off, but leave the bolt in, because that'll keep things in place for us. In the dirt. Remove the left side cover. Side cover, 2 screws, and this kind of a plunger that goes through a grommet that holds it in place. Now, because the wind is starting to blow, that's predictable. Put this somewhere, or hopefully the wind doesn't blow the screws away. Actually, since we made such a big deal of it, let's put the screws back in the holes again. That's never a bad idea. On my Alaska trip bike, actually there was a few reasons I did this, but I removed the side panels and just didn't put them back on. Partially because the way things were put together, the back seat, I cut it off about here, just long enough to leave this mounting spot, and just remove the back of the seat completely. Because when I put the rear box on, the rear box extended over the seat. You need to get the seat off to do some of your maintenance, like pulling the tank off to get to the spark plug. So if you can't get the seat off, you can't do anything. And then the other part of it was your side panel has to come off to get the seat off. So I figured if I just removed the side panels completely, also because my panniers covered the side panels. So I'm like, okay, I can't take the panniers off every time I want to get to the spark plug. That would be ridiculous. So I said, okay, panniers go on, side covers just get removed. Then I went with the IMS style, I don't remember if it was actually an IMS tank, maybe it was plastic tank instead of metal tank. So that, when I put the plastic tank on, I had the metal tank, the side scoops, and the side panels that I didn't need anymore. I had bought the bike from a motorcycle recycling place up in Canada when I lived there. So they bought and sold parts all the time, and so what I ended up doing is I took the tank, the side scoops, and the side panels, traded them for a new chain and new sprockets, I think. Yeah, I think that's how it worked out. And there's a little bit of money, but I remember, I think I probably paid them a little bit, and then got stuff I needed and got rid of stuff I didn't need, and didn't have to screw around with eBay. So that worked out really well. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is take this breather hose off. That red Anderson connector is one of those handy ideas that I also did on the Alaska bike. What this is a 50 amp connector that goes right to the battery. gives you an option that you could do a jump start or just pull power from the battery or charge the battery without having to take everything apart. Pretty handy idea. So if you're doing any maintenance on your bike, think about something like that. It's running 10 gauge wire right to the battery. So you can get to positive and negative without pulling the seat off, basically, because the battery is in a spot that you really can't get down to it very easily. I think what they assumed was you would take the battery out to charge it and then put it back in, but you can't really jump start it. So, just one of those things. Okay, breather hose out of the way. Now, they don't talk about holding the nut. This will be interesting to see what's on the other side of that. Yeah, must be a captive nut. That's nice. That's something to think about. Be careful putting it back in so you don't cross thread it. That would suck to cross thread a captive nut that's on the back side of something. Not be a good day. Okay, so this would be a real easy shot if I hadn't put that 50 amp connector right in the way. That shock shouldn't go anywhere. Not very far anyway. Okay, again, take a look at the bolts. Not broken, no cracks, no weird wear. That's good. Yeah. That's welded on the back of the bracket. How about that? That is not a very big bracket. A lot of this bike, kind of underbuilt. You know, a lot of it, they just kind of looked at it, okay. It's a relatively inexpensive bike. And that's kind of part of it is large parts of this are steel, where a lot of bikes would be aluminum. They simplified it. It's, you know, the frame, it's round tubing. You know, the swing arm they made out of box section, but they didn't go all crazy with fancy construction. They simplified it a lot, so you can afford to buy it. Is the idea. Guess you gotta like that. Okay, again, I'm just kind of taking a moment to look at the thing before I pull it out, so I know which way it faces. I know that my preload adjuster is facing out this way, and my dampener adjuster is on the other side. So that's how you're going to face it going back in. Now we loosened up the nut on the bottom, so now we can take it off and pull it out. So I'm going to have one hand on the shock so I can drop it. Pull the nut off, or bolt off. Just swing it around. That's it. Shock be gone. Okay, that's that. Now I've been noticing this thing is just bouncy, so I want to see if I can press it by hand. Not really. It's got a lot of force on it, but it is pretty dirty. Oil is holding the dirt, so that's a pretty good sign. It's very likely blown. Alright. I'm just looking at them side by side on the bench. Basically the same. I don't see any differences. Nothing really stands out. Good. Now the next thing, okay, the top bolt I put back in its hole so I wouldn't lose it. So what I'm going to do now, put the bottom bolt through the bearing little bit of movement there. And then I was noticing, yeah, this link has got a lot of movement. I think the link itself is wearing out, which is okay because I wanted to change that. But I'm also kind of playing with the bell crank that I want to leave in there, and I think that looks okay. Alright, so I'm going to put the bolt back in the pivot for now, so I don't lose it. Okay, so I know which one that is. Okay, now I'm going to remove the links, and I'll get ready to put the new links on. Now, something to keep in mind on this one, I'm going to keep saying this until hopefully I remember. What's my shot look like here? A lot of backlighting, but when these bikes get lowered, the idea is the KLR is a pretty tall bike. A lot of guys buy it because they can afford it, they like the looks of it, and then they realize that they aren't tall enough to really ride it comfortably. So companies have come along and put a shorter linked kit together that basically makes the bike sit lower. The problem with that is you lose some suspension travel, and it also changes the geometry of how the shock works. So I think that may be part of why I had trouble with this shock. My Alaska bike, I didn't put the lowering kit on it. I don't think it had one. I'm pretty sure it had original suspension on it. But I had so much freaking load on that bike that it sat down really low anyway. I remember the first time after I got to Austin, after I had unloaded pretty much the entire bike, I came rolling up to a stop sign and almost dropped the bike because I forgot how far I had to put my foot down. And it was kind of funny because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm sitting about 4 inches taller than I usually am. So anyway, part of that though, you notice that there's no paint down here. What I'm thinking, they cut the side stand shorter. So they cut it off, moved the foot up, and re-welded it. Okay. When I put the bike back up to where it's supposed to be, I'm going to have to redo that. And what I want to do, I've got this piece of aluminum that this was on the Alaska trip with me also. I would throw this down in the dirt and then put the side stand down so the bike wouldn't tip over when it was parked in soft soil. And that worked out really well. Now, I can't weld aluminum, I don't have the stuff for it right now. But when I redo this, I think what I want to do is just leave this where it is and then put a bigger plate on the bottom of it and just give it a you know, maybe with this big round, a nice flat piece of metal. And while I'm doing that, that'll make it a little bit taller. Okay, so that might be enough right there. So I'm going to play with that a little bit, just make it a little bit bigger foot and make it a little bit taller at the same time. And then we're good to go. KLRs are also famous for tipping over randomly. And part of it is they sit up too high. So I think by leaving this a little bit on the short side, when I raise the bike back up, it's going to lean over further. And by putting a bigger foot on the bottom, I think that'll all work out and be fine. So that's the theory. Okay, enough yattering. I'm going to swap out the links now. Probably also 17. That would be nice. Good. Same size. Still 17 and then 22 on the other side. Find all the wrenches at the same time. This would probably be simpler with a wrench. But, you know, whatever. I was just telling myself I didn't want to go look for the wrench, then I realized that the 17 was probably pretty close to where I found the 18. It is. So, why not, right? hard one. It's never in the right spot. Okay, I don't think there's any extra spacers in here. Again, I'll put it back together. One lowering kit. Yeah, I'm going to leave these bolts with this kit and then use the ones that came with the shock. I'm going to break everything loose first. With all that said, you didn't see anything I was doing there, did you? I just realized that shot was not lined up. Basically, I loosened up all the bolts that came with the new shock, the new used shock. And so now it's easier to put together. I'm going to put the shock in the bike first, get it hanging, and then I'm going to put those links on the bike and then assemble it from there. Okay, just so you don't feel like you're missing out, this bolt right here is the one that holds the top of the shock. It's apparently got a captive nut welded on the back side. Not a very big bracket, but I guess they figured it's enough. And then the bottom comes down. Down here is the bell crank that the shock mounts to the bottom. And then this part here is where the links go, up to the swing arm right there. Cool. Now you know. Even if I took the time to mount a camera to my head, half of what you do is by feeling anyway. So. Alright, so I'm going to push the bell crank out of the way. I reach in here, pull that bolt off I just showed you. Throw it carefully in the dirt. That's the top one. I'm just kind of looking at it. The color of it is darker. Okay. This is the preload adjustment, and the damper is on the other side. Nice and clean. Okay, so I know it's going to go this way so I can see this. Alright. Put the bolt where I can reach it. Hopefully. If this went all the way through, I could stick a screwdriver or something through the hole just to hold it, but it doesn't. It's going to be a little bit fiddly. Try to line it up as best I can. Figure out which hand I can get in there easier. Breather hose is ready to play. A little bit of a wiggle. Okay, we're started. I think the glove is going to fight me on this one. See if I can get that breather to stay out of the way. One hand on the shock just to take the pressure off it a little bit. And take your time, start it by hand, don't crank it in there. It's a fine thread on a captive nut. If you bugger that up, your life is getting a lot more difficult. It's definitely started. Good. I suspect there's a torque value on a bunch of these. I do not have a torque crunch. You know, what the hell? Let's look, at least see if there is a torque value. Torque value, shock absorber, upper 44 foot-pounds, lower 72. We're going to simulate that obviously because I don't have a torque wrench, but knowing it's 44, this is a foot long. Now, to give myself a little bit extra help, I'm going to leave that a little bit loose until I get the bottom hooked up, just in case I need a little bit of slack. through nicely. I'll look at the other side to see if it's out of alignment. Pretty close. I just need a little bit of a bump. Now I'm purposely not even going to get my hammer. I don't want to hit none of this stuff very hard. I'll whack it with my breaker bar and screwdriver for a drift. There we go. Seated. Put the nut on. On there, just kind of wipe some of the dirt off. Since I don't see an obvious up or down or in or out orientation on here, the only difference I can see, okay, look at that, there's a slight difference. Where the bolt head goes, they recessed it a little bit so that it's got less sticking out. The one on the opposite side is not recessed. Okay, so if you can see this inside the pocket here, it's recessed a little bit. The bolt is a low profile bolt and it gets into that pocket quite a bit. The one on the right hand side of the bike does not have a recess. Okay, so now we know. And otherwise I don't see that there's any markings that say shock end or swing arm end. But we'll keep the recess facing this way. I think that's to clear the chain. Alright, so we'll go with that. Just slip it down over here. Put the nut on. And the next step is we're going to attach this to the swing arm. And then once everything is attached, I'm going to go through and tighten them all. Let's tighten the shock up first and then we know that we got it. So this one's going to be 44 foot-pounds. Keeping in mind that we're sitting on the stand, I don't knock the bike off the stand is my reason for saying that. Now, my wonderful Anderson connectors right in the way. Say that's about 44. The bottom one has to be, let me look. Shock absorber lower 72 foot-pounds. That's probably about as hard as I can pull with one arm. I suspect from taking this apart, they didn't have that link put together tight enough. I mean, maybe it was, but part of this, you want to make sure it's tight enough that your bearings are doing their job. It's not just pivoting on the bolt. Also, we're tightening the nut side, we're not tightening the bolt side. That takes care of your friction problem. Alright, that's pretty good. Okay, now we do the links. And for this, connecting it to the swing arm. Side stand in the way, get that down. Okay, we're gonna need to let the swing arm down now. Which means my hook is too long, too short, too something. So basically I'm gonna have one hand on the wire so I don't stretch up my brake cable too much. Okay, the upper shock bolt was 44 and everything else is 72. So that's easy. We just get them all the same. Okay, rear shock is down. I'm going to put that breather hose on and read through the directions to see if I missed anything. Basically, that's it for the shock. Not too bad. I was just kind of thinking, do I need anything else that's behind that side cover? I don't think I do, so I'm going to put the side cover back on. Just to get that done. Screwdriver's there, good. For these, I'm using a number 3 Phillips screwdriver. These screws, a lot of the screws on the fairing and stuff are bigger than a number 2. Now you don't gotta kill them, but if your number 2 isn't fitting very well, that's probably why. One of the forums I was reading one time, the guy talked about Japanese have their own standard for hardware. I mean, it's not just metric, but the screw that they're using is not exactly a Phillips, or at least not a Phillips number 2. So it would be interesting to find a set of Japanese screwdrivers. I wonder if the one in the kit is actually appropriate or not. I've had this for quite a while. It's just nice to have a little bit better fit. So, side panel on, basically the shock is done. Alright. I'm going to go off camera, drink my coffee, fill up my water bottle, then we're going to tackle the rear wheel. Be ready for that because that can be a booger sometimes. The other story is, okay, so I raised the bike up a little bit just by having the new tires. So that sits up, you know, half an inch higher maybe. But then I also removed the lowering kit, so it's got stock ride height right now. Now I've got the preload on the lowest setting, and it felt pretty good. So I'm gonna run it for a little bit and just kind of get a feel for it. But what I did, this silver thing right here has been replaced, and also now it's got a quote-unquote new used shock in there. So the old shock was blown, so I couldn't get the adjustment right, and the bike was lowered before, so now it's sitting up where it's supposed to. I think it was probably riding low also because the shock was blown. All right, so now it's like it should be. I have to be careful now because it sits up a lot taller than I'm used to. The old bike, the first one I took to Alaska, was normal ride height like this one is now, except that bike was fully loaded, so it sat down considerably.
Well, that's about it. Thank you so much for watching. Yeah, that should work. Cool. I do things differently. Oh, and please, if you like any of this, it would be really awesome if you could subscribe and click that notify bell. Drop a comment if you have any questions or ideas. Share, like, comment, subscribe, notify. Oh, and Patreon if you're really an awesome kind of person. Thank you so much for watching.